All right, if you have your Bible, we're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. We're going to look at the last few verses there, I believe, tonight. And then next week we'll get into the next chapter, and then we'll almost be done. We still have a few weeks left, but we're going to work through all of it. And so Ecclesiastes chapter 9. And one of the stories that we're going to look at tonight, it's interesting. And I want to start by just giving you a preview of it without reading the verses, but there's a small town. That small town gets ransacked and overtaken by a powerful king, and he surrounds the city. He's gonna crush the city. But inside the city, there's this poor man and somebody that nobody knows. He has no fame. He has no fortune. Nothing. But what he does have is wisdom. And this poor man, who's nameless, he implements that wisdom. And what happens is that no one remembers him, no one remembers his story, and he kind of fades away into nothing. But it's because of that one man who nobody knows that the city that was under siege and going to be sieged ended up being just fine. And it's weird that there are these stories that play out in human history, and sometimes we remember the heroes of those stories, things that happen, and you remember specifically the name of sort of the person who came in and swept in and saved the day, right? But the truth of the matter is that the story that Solomon tells is a story that echoes through history in a lot of different ways about someone who has, maybe they don't have the namesake, they're not famous, they don't have a platform, whatever you want to call it. But that what they do have is they have wisdom, and I'm going to say godly wisdom. They have godly wisdom that they bring to a situation and circumstance that really is the backbone behind those heroes. Because the truth is that all the famous people who won incredible battles and all those things, all those famous kings and conquerors and all that, we know their names. But the truth of the matter is there are a lot of no-name people that were behind them, giving them intel, supporting them, and making a lot of decisions in order to make them successful. And so Solomon says to us over and over again in the book of Ecclesiastes that when we think about life and we think about these situations and circumstances and how things just don't always follow the rules that we expect for them to follow, right? We expect, even for people in your job, right? If you come up with a great idea, right, that's going to make your company millions of dollars, chances are, unless you run that company, you're probably not going to get a lot of credit for it, right? Somebody else who runs the company, owns the company, they're going to be the ones the news is talking about, not you, right? And so Solomon looks around and he says, man, it's crazy that you look at all the wisdom that exists in the world, and we're not celebrating those who are exercising wisdom. We're celebrating all this other stuff. And Solomon says, I don't understand why we do this, because when you look around at the world and look around at the rules of the world and how things work in the world, he comes to the conclusion that time and chance happen to everybody. It happens to everybody. Right? You could spend all of your life, if you're an Olympian, you can spend all of your life training. If you're an Olympic runner, you spend all your life training. You get to the line that faithful day, the gun goes off, you're the favorite to win, right? You're the fastest person there. The gun goes off, you take 2 steps and you fall down. And it just happens, right? You jump hurdles. You're the best. You can jump the highest. Your foot catches one. And all of a sudden, the person who's favored, the person who everyone thinks is going to win, doesn't. And then somebody they probably have at least a name recognition, right? Because they're in the Olympics. But the crowd is surprised, right? Because the crowd thinks, man, this guy's got it. He's it. And then he's not. And that's really, for most of us, that illustration is what life is like, right? We have these ideas and these notions. We look around and we think that this is going to be successful. Why? Because it's the latest and greatest and it has to be. And then we run after it and then it's not. And we don't understand, right? Or the gun goes off and we take 2 steps and we fall on our face, right? And the race continues on, but we're kind of left behind. And so the swift don't always win, right? And the wise don't always get honored. But what Solomon does tell us, and what we're going to see tonight, is that even still, living in this world and operating from a position of wisdom, it still matters. So even though time and chance are a reality, even though things don't always go according to plan, even though things don't always fall in line with the way that we think they should, it doesn't mean that we should just dismiss wisdom. Right? It doesn't mean that we should say, well, bad stuff is going to happen, so I'm just going to live recklessly anyway because bad stuff is coming no matter what. Right? So he says, no, wisdom still matters even if it's unnoticed by the world. In fact, in a world of unpredictability, wisdom offers something better than notice, better than recognition. What does wisdom offer? It offers preservation. Those who endure to the end are the wise. The wise and the wisdom is what saves the city. It's wisdom that brings the chaos of the world into its right perspective. Solomon is wrestling with these realities over and over and over and over again. And what we've seen so far, and I hope that you've picked up on this, is that in all of life's situations and circumstances, Solomon has always, every time, been coming back to this sort of central idea that in this life there is something deeper. There is something more valuable than everything else and anything else. And that thing is wisdom. Verse 11, again, I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor the bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. For man does not know his time. Like the fish that are taken in an evil net, like the birds that are caught up in a snare, so the children of man are snared at the evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. I've also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with a few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he, by his wisdom, delivered the city, yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Solomon says in verse 11 again, I saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. Solomon brings out an uncomfortable truth. When you read that, you read it, and for me, I think, well, what in the world? That doesn't make sense, right? The race is not for the swift. No, the fastest person wins the race, right? That's the way it works. The battle is not for the strong. Well, no, we understand that in order to really win the battle, it takes immense amounts of strength, or riches to the intelligence, favor to those with knowledge. And so Solomon brings out the truth that life just doesn't always make sense. Fastest runner doesn't win. The strongest warrior doesn't always triumph in battle. The wisest person doesn't always have enough to eat. Why? Because time and chance happen to all of them. Now, what Solomon is not doing, because I think it's important for us to know, Solomon is not denying the sovereignty of God here. He's not saying, well, it's just all out of control. But what does he say in that first verse? He talks about under the sun. So remember, what he's doing is he's bringing it back from this sort of godly perspective, bringing it back down here to look at it from this earthly human perspective. And so he says, when we look at things from our plane of existence, when that is our measuring rod for truth and all of these things in the world, things just seem random. Things just happen, and things that we can't explain, things that don't make sense, right? The world doesn't always bring reward to those who are putting forth the most effort, right? Or have the most skill or the most virtue. In fact, if you work, it's really easy if you work a job out in the world to see this played out pretty regularly, right? There are people who gain positions not because they're the most skilled, not because they have the most knowledge, or sometimes not even because they put forth the most effort, right? Sometimes it's just, hey, the boss is my buddy, and so there's a promotion coming up, so buddy gets it, right? And that we see these things play out over and over again. I mean, you think about this as another example, that guy who he works hard his whole life, and then what happens? The company takes a turn. They have to lay people off. And this guy who's poured his blood, sweat, and tears into this company forever is all of a sudden on the chopping block, and they say, well, we've got to let people go. Or what about a student? Right? A student who studies, they have a test coming up. They study and study and study till they're ready. In the morning, they wake up, they're going to go take the test, and they're sick as a dog. It's like, man, like I put all this stuff in my head, and now my head's about to explode because I have a sinus infection, right? It's time and chance. And Solomon brings this to the forefront not to break us, but to remind us that our confidence cannot rest in the outcomes of this life. Meaning that student who gets sick and they take the test, well, they studied, they did everything they could, and life happened. They take the test, they do good or bad. Oh, well, it's one thing in this myriad of other things that are going to happen in their life. The truth is, somebody who's poured their blood, sweat, and tears into a job, and they get cut from that job, it may be devastating because they put a lot of time, effort, and energy into that. But in the myriad of things that have happened in that person's life, that's just one thing that has happened. And if you put your confidence in the outcomes of your life, then you're going to be disappointed and you're going to be frustrated a whole lot. Right? If you build your life on successes, right? If that's what drives you, if success of that thing drives you, then you're going to be disappointed because not everybody is successful all the time. In fact, nobody is successful all the time. We all fall short of the glory of God. We all mess up. We all make mistakes, right? There are going to be things that you just don't handle the right way. You don't do the right way. And if you put your hope and your confidence in everything panning out just okay, then you're going to be frustrated because sometimes it doesn't work out like you think it should, right? The outcomes, and when I say putting confidence in the outcomes, I mean in your outcomes, not in the Lord's, but in what you think the outcome ought to be. And so what he's doing here is he's pushing us to say, okay, well, if I'm not confident in the outcomes because of time and chance, if I don't know what's going to happen in the future, which FYI, we don't. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, in the next minute, the next hour, the next week, the next day. You just don't know what's going to happen. And so he says, we have to put our confidence in something that's more stable than success. Right? Because success can come or it may not. And sometimes it's not dependent on how much you put in. Right? You see what he's doing? And so what is he talking about? If we're going to put our confidence in something other than success, what do we put our confidence in? Wisdom. Wisdom. Why? Because wisdom can take success and use it. But wisdom can also take failure and use it. Right? So wisdom is this great equalizer that brings perspective, and a right perspective, to successes and failures. And so confidence resting in wisdom. and not outcomes. For man does not know his time. Like fish that are taken in an evil net, like birds that are caught up in a snare, so the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. Again, in case you don't get what he's talking about there, again, life is unpredictable. And so is death, right? We don't know when the end is coming. And most of the time it happens suddenly. Right? I mean, most of the time it is like fish. We're just kind of swimming freely in the world, and then all of a sudden, boom, somebody we love is taken out of this world. Now, I understand that we at least have in our minds that we're all getting older and we're all eventually going to die. But no one that I've ever talked to, even that I've preached funerals for, the family, nobody that I know said, oh, well, yeah, we were really thinking about this. Most of them are treasuring the moments they have, right? They're thinking about the time that they're sharing with their loved one. Now, once that loved one passes, yeah, they have a different outlook. They're looking at things a little bit differently, but nobody knows the moment. Right? Even when someone's old, even when someone's sick, you don't know the moment that they're going to breathe their last breath. Being at someone's bedside, right? When they're literally in the final moments of their life, but I don't know when they're going to breathe their last. Neither do their loved ones. And so, in essence, all of it, all the time, it does come on kind of suddenly. Like birds that are just out there flying, they're living their life, and the next thing they know, they're in a net. I mean, and the thing about it, this is hard for us to wrap our minds around because it challenges our pride, right? Because then what Solomon is doing is he's saying you have to have confidence in wisdom, not outcomes. And one of the reasons is because your pride doesn't matter. You can plan, you can prepare, you can project, you can do all of those things, but life can change in a minute. Right? It can change in a minute. Right? I can plan a vacation for 2 years from now. Greatest vacation ever. But in a moment, those plans can go out the window. Our life is the same way. We can plan, we can prepare, we can do the best we can. But in one moment, through one circumstance, maybe not even of our own doing, all of that can change. Maybe it's a diagnosis at the doctor. Maybe it's an accident. Maybe it's a phone call. The thing about it is we don't know when the snare of death is coming. We don't know. So how do we live in light of that? That becomes the question. And Solomon doesn't say, well, suck it up, buttercup. Put a smile on your face. No, and the flip side is he doesn't say, well, just walk around sad like Eeyore all the time, right? Don't. No, he says, you know what? What do? We live with wisdom, right? Well, what does that look like in this situation? Well, we live carefully, right? We do that. We do the things that we need to do, that we go get wellness checks. We go have blood work done, right? We go see all these doctors so that we make sure that we're taking care of ourselves in the best way that we can. We take medicine to help with that and all those sorts of things. We also live intentionally, independently. We treasure the moments that God has given to us by recognizing that none of them are guaranteed. So we're confident in the wisdom that God has given to us. And that confidence in wisdom, it leads us to a place of humility. So again, the implementation of wisdom brings us to a place of humility because we don't know. Time and chance are a very real thing in this world that we live in, and there are a lot of things we don't know and we can't know. We may not ever know. And so what do? We just take advantage of the time that God has given us, and we live in such a way that brings glory and honor to God with wisdom in the way that we live. Right? I've also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. Again, this is the story I talked about in the beginning. There was a little city, with a few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor man, a wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city, yet no one remembered that poor man. It really is in the middle of this passage a parable. Right? A parable of a city that stood no chance against a mighty king. But this guy that nobody knows, he's not wealthy, he's not rich, he doesn't have a platform. And somehow, through his wisdom, he saves the city. Not swords, not riches, just wisdom. It's power versus wisdom, wealth versus poverty, noise versus quiet. And Solomon says, in the end, none of those things matter. What matters and what wins is wisdom. And here's where this confronts the reality of our sinful lostness and our flesh. Is that wisdom rarely, if ever, gets your name on a building. Rarely, if ever, does your name get in a history book. The tragedy, if there is a tragedy to this, is that no one remembered this poor man who saved a city. I think that in a broken world, wisdom, and I mean true wisdom, it may be ignored, it may be forgotten, it may be rejected, but it still matters. It still saves, it still honors God. When I was thinking about this parable in the middle of Solomon's writings here, I thought of Jesus. He came without riches, he had no army, and was despised and rejected. But in his wisdom, he saved a people. 1 Corinthians 1:24 says, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. The world didn't recognize him, but his wisdom triumphed where strength and strategy never could. It's interesting that in the middle of this sort of picture that Solomon is giving us and having confidence and understanding time and chance and all of those things and understanding the reality of and the importance of humility, he brings in this parable that gives us a picture of the Messiah. And I don't know, I don't know if this is a stretch or not. I'm just working this out with you. So, but in the middle of this, he tells this parable, and it kind of relates over to Jesus, and we look over at Jesus, and we realize that everything that the world wanted Jesus to do in his wisdom, he rejected it, right? If you are the Son of God, right? Then call down legions of angels, right? Save yourself, right? And Jesus even says, if I wanted to, I could, right? He rejected the wisdom of the world at any time. Right? At any time, he could have accepted that worldly confidence, that worldly hope. He could have done all of that, but in his wisdom as God the Son, he bore the cross. He was despised and rejected. It wasn't about the army. It wasn't about the riches. It wasn't about being King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It wasn't in that moment even about that. It was about this guy from Nazareth. What good could come from Nazareth? Who was going around, healing the sick, forgiving people's sins, who would go to the cross to ultimately be the sacrifice for their sins. And all of that born out of a place of humility and wisdom. Right? Even the disciples, right, ask him, what do you mean? When he talked about rebuilding the temple, it's going to be torn down and rebuilt in 3 days, they're like, what do you mean? He's like, you're going to understand. You will. You're going to have that wisdom. You're going to get it. And it's an interesting thing to think about. That the cross could be an incredible picture of the power of God, the forgiveness of God, the grace of God. But how often do we look at the cross and think, what an incredible picture of the wisdom of God? When there was no way, God made a way. Without the shedding of blood, there's no remission for sin. God made a way. And it wasn't through the conquering of nations. It wasn't through a social justice gospel. It was through wisdom that led him to the cross at Calvary. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. The words of the wise, heard in quiet, are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. So Solomon goes from bringing wisdom, kind of goes into this parable, and then he comes to the end of this and he brings in Proverbs. Right? That's what he's doing here. It's a series of Proverbs. Wisdom is better than might, even if it's despised. Quiet wisdom is better than loud foolishness, right? Better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons. But sin still is destructive beyond what we see. What's the point in this? We don't measure wisdom by applause. And I think, again, this kind of is where the rubber meets the road for us, and it goes against our fleshly understanding. Because we, in our hearts and in our minds, think that if we have a good idea, if we implement a good idea that changes the world, or if we have a good idea and we pitch it to somebody and then we think that we should get a pat on the back, we think that we should get a seat on the stage, we think that we should be welcome to the party. And Solomon says, man, that's not how it works. If the guy who saves the city is not remembered, right? If the one who saved the world is rejected, then we should never be a people who measure wisdom by applause, meaning that we should never assume something like silence means insignificance. Right? Implementing wisdom, living wisely in this world, living for the glory and honor of God, just because we don't see the effects of that doesn't mean nothing's happening. And I think that's important for us as Christians in this world, especially because a lot of the work that we do to help people and to pour into the lives of people, especially as your pastor, I'll just tell you, a lot of times I get a glimpse into what the Lord uses preaching and teaching and the ministry that I do. I get a glimpse into that on occasion, but I'm not privy to that in most of the folks in the congregation, right? In any congregation I've ever been in. It's just the way that it is. And so for me, I look at this and I'm like, absolutely. Just because the clouds aren't being rolled back as a scroll and trumpets are coming from heaven and the Lord is saying, well done, right now, just because that's not happening doesn't curtail the significance of what ministry is happening, what's being done. When you're pouring in the life of somebody, just because you're not maybe seeing the effects of that right now, it doesn't mean that God isn't doing something. It doesn't mean that something isn't happening. And this is hard for us because what we want in the world that we live in, we want instant gratification, right? But that's confidence in outcomes. Confidence in wisdom is not about instant gratification. It's about understanding that true wisdom may go unnoticed in this world, but it's precious in the eyes of God. You may spend your life loving your spouse with everything that you are. You may have a great marriage. And no one may ever say, man, you guys are really killing it. Your marriage is something that other people should look at as an example. You may never hear those words, but that doesn't mean that your marriage is insignificant in the eyes of God. God looks at you and says, no, this is a precious example of my word being lived out as a husband loves his wife, as Christ loves the church. You may pour your life and the gospel into somebody, and you may never, ever know the fruit of that labor. You may never know. Doesn't mean it's insignificant. Well, it depends on who you ask. Because there are a lot of people out there in churches all over this country who don't believe in telling people. They believe in evangelism and telling people about Jesus, but they don't do it. You want to know why? Because wisdom goes unnoticed. Because you can spend your life telling someone about the gospel and they move away and you never know what happens to them. Maybe they come to faith, maybe they don't. But you don't get that instant gratification. You don't have confidence in the outcome. Does that minimize what you're doing? No. No. Because exercising wisdom and sharing the gospel is precious in the eyes of our Savior. And here's the thing, and I don't want you to miss this part of it either. One person's folly or foolishness or sinfulness can undo much good. I'm going to bring this down to us right now. And this is the unfortunate part of the world that we live in, and this is why we need confidence in wisdom and not outcomes. Because if you have confidence in outcomes, you can have an incredible ministry, and you could commit one selfish act. You could say one proud word, and everything that you've poured your life into, all the ministry you've poured your life into, that person that you poured your life into, can be over. It can be over. Does it have to be? No, it doesn't have to be. But one folly, one sin can undo much good. That's why we need not just human wisdom, but godly wisdom. We need wisdom that's rooted in the fear of the Lord, because if our wisdom is rooted in Him, in the fear of the Lord, then we have true knowledge. We have true insight. And that helps us as the people of God to live in a way that brings glory and honor to God, so that we are a people who are a forgiving people. That's what we do as Christians. Now, you look at the church, you look at people who have fallen, and you will realize that some of the most unforgiving people in the world are church people. We like to talk about it, but we like confidence in the outcomes, not in the wisdom, right? And so our brother falls, and they fall hard, and what do? They become a liability to us. Not a brother, not a sister, they become a liability. Because why? Because we want confidence in the outcome, and if we pour into their life someone who's committed an egregious sin, if we pour into their life and say, man, you know you messed up, but God loves you, we love you, we're going to bring you along on this journey of repentance and restoration, man, that looks real bad in the world that we live in. Because the world that we live in wants to run a risk analysis on everybody. Right? What damage is this going to do to the church, the name of the church, and all that? Here's the thing about it is, that's not our responsibility. We're responsible for living humbly and with wisdom, and we're to be the most forgiving people in the world, because so far as the east is from the west, so Christ has removed our iniquity from us. If you're a brother, a genuine brother, and you're repentant, I don't care what you've done. There's grace for you here. I told you on Sunday morning a couple weeks ago, as I've gotten older, biblically and theologically, I've become more and more conservative. But when it comes to the mercy of God, the grace of God, and the forgiveness of God, I am a flaming liberal. I believe that we should pour out God's forgiveness on our brothers and sisters, and we shouldn't write them off, but we should use wisdom. We shouldn't worry about the outcome. What is this going to look like? We need to worry about the truth of God's word and what has God told us to do. All rooted in the fear of the Lord. And in this world that we live in, life under the sun, the swift don't always win. The wise are overlooked, and the outcomes that we expect aren't guaranteed. So what do? We live as God has called us to live. We live as gospel-transformed people, called to live gospel-transformed. And in that, wisdom matters. Wisdom matters beyond all outcomes. You know why churches close their doors? Because they rest their confidence in outcomes. If we can just get more people, if we can just give more money, if we can just do this or that, then that's going to fix everything. No. What happens at the end of the day is there's an unbelievable pursuit of outcomes over wisdom, and so we just throw our heart out the window. And instead of looking in our own hearts and say, what do we need to fix here? Right? We always look outside, right? What are these sort of superficial things? But we always need to look here first. Right? If there's a problem in the church, if there's a problem in the church, you don't look to somebody else. You look here first, right? You look at the plank in your own eye, right? Why? Because that's what godly wisdom is. And you're not going to make the headlines doing that, right? You're not. You're not going to get applause. But in the economy of God, what God says to us is that wisdom is always better than all the other stuff. Right? It's better than might. It's better than weapons. It's better than noise. And I want to tell you, we're going to end with a story. There was a story of a Navy battleship. It was navigating through foggy waters. It was late at night. And the captain looks out from the bridge and he sees a light directly in their path. He gets on the radio. He says, "This is USS Montgomery, a Class A battleship. Change your course 10 degrees starboard." There's a voice that comes back over the radio, "Negative, you change your course 10 degrees port." And this captain at this point is frustrated, but he responds, "I'm a captain in the U.S. Navy. Change your course." The voice over the radio comes back, "I'm a seaman, second class. Change your course." Captain at this point is enraged. This is a battleship. I command you, change your course. Again, calmly over the radio, "This is a lighthouse. Your call." That's what wisdom is like. It's not loud, may not look impressive, it may be overlooked or dismissed, but it's anchored. It doesn't move, and if you ignore it, you crash. Solomon is saying, don't be fooled by power, by speed, by noise. Listen to the quiet voice of wisdom, especially the wisdom of Christ. The world may rush past it. The proud may shout over it, but those who heed it find life. And we have to ask ourselves, are we building our life on the steady wisdom of God? Or are we building our life on the noise and the speed and all that other stuff? Because if we are building our life on anything other than the wisdom of God, you're just waiting for the crash that God is going to bring to humble you. If you live your life for the applause of men, that applause will fade. But if you put your trust, if you put your faith, and you rest in the wisdom of God, if you trust the one who's forgotten by the world, you're trusting the one who's crowned with glory by the Father. Anchored in the truth. Even if no one sees it, even if no one remembers you, He does. And His wisdom, we know, never fails. So where are we as the people of God going to build our life? Where are we going to put our confidence? Are we going to put it in the shifting realities of this world? Are we going to put it in the next new, latest, and greatest church growth strategy so you can buy 1,500 books and all that? Do you put your confidence in those things, or do you trust in the wisdom that God has given you? The greatest church growth plan that God ever gave was Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Go, therefore. Proclaim the gospel to the nations, right? Baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Why would you baptize them? Well, when they get saved. So there's an element of the gospel proclamation going forth. And then there's an element of teaching them, discipling them in the obedience of Christ through baptism and through teaching them all that I've commanded you, right? And what does Jesus say? Lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. The greatest wisdom ever given to us is that our hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. So why would we trust in anything else? And it's definitely something that Solomon sees in a world of time and chance. Why would you anchor your life in the unknown when you can anchor your life in the wisdom of God, who knows all, sees all, and is working in and through all? Any questions?